It all started on a regular Tuesday evening. I had just finished cleaning up after dinner when George, my husband, suddenly blurted out, "My parents are coming to live with us." His words struck me like a bolt of lightning, completely catching me off guard. I hadn't been given any warning, no heads up, not even the slightest hint that such a thing was happening. For a moment, I was too stunned to respond. This was the home we had shared for years, the place where we raised our daughter Anna. Now, out of the blue, he was telling me that I had to accommodate his parents. "Can you leave the house for a while?" he added, his tone cold and indifferent, as if asking me to step aside was no big deal. I felt my heart racing, but I kept my voice steady. "Okay," I replied, trying to process what he had just said, "but I need some time to pack. Can you wait until tomorrow?" His expression barely changed as he responded, "Fine. I'll stay in a hotel until then. I don't want to see your face." That last sentence stung, but I swallowed my pride. I wondered silently where he would get the money for a hotel, suspecting he'd use our joint account. I didn't ask. I just watched him leave, feeling a mix of anger, sadness, and confusion. After George left, I sat down on the couch, staring at the walls of the house I had worked so hard to maintain. Every corner of this home carried memories of our life together, but his cold attitude made me feel like an outsider in my own space. I let out a deep sigh, thinking about the $1,800 mortgage that I had been paying each month, without much appreciation from George. He didn't seem to understand or care about the financial burden I carried for both of us. It was hard not to feel resentful. Our relationship had been rocky for some time, but this situation was pushing things to a breaking point. George had always been irresponsible with money, quitting jobs at the first sign of trouble and relying on me to keep our household running. I had been the steady one, the reliable one, but now I was being pushed out of the very home I was paying for. I pulled myself together and decided to take action. I picked up the phone and called Anna, our daughter. She had moved out a few years ago and was living in another state with her husband. "Anna," I said, my voice trembling slightly, "I need to leave the house for a while. Can I stay with you?" Her response was immediate and comforting. "Of course, Mom. I'll come pick you up tomorrow." That night, I couldn't sleep. My mind kept racing, trying to make sense of everything. George's behavior had become increasingly unpredictable over the years, but I never expected it to escalate to this. He used to be a different man when we first got married, ambitious, kind, full of dreams. I remembered the days when his eyes sparkled with hope, but over time, that sparkle faded, replaced by bitterness and resentment. He had been stuck in part-time jobs for years, unable to hold down steady employment, while I had been the one carrying the financial load. Sometimes, I wondered if he even realized how much I was contributing to this family. Just as I was about to drift off to sleep, another thought jolted me awake: the joint bank account. I decided to check it in the morning. When I logged in, my heart sank. $2,000 was missing. George had never mentioned any big expenses lately, so where had the money gone? My stomach tightened as I realized I'd have to confront him about this. I waited until he returned from wherever he had been, bracing myself for the conversation. "George," I began cautiously, "what happened to the $2,000 in our account?" He looked annoyed, as if the question was a burden. "I gave it to my parents," he replied casually. "What?" I asked, shocked. "For what reason?" His next words left me speechless. "I thought I'd surprise them with a hot spring trip. It's my mother's birthday." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. George had taken $2,000 from our joint account to fund a surprise trip for his parents without even discussing it with me. We had bills to pay, a mortgage to cover, and yet he thought it was perfectly fine to spend such a large amount of money on a whim. Anger bubbled up inside me, but I tried to remain calm. "You should have used your own money for that," I said, my voice trembling with frustration. "This is our household account. We're supposed to make decisions like this together." George shrugged, completely unfazed. "It's all part of being a good son," he said, as if that justified everything. I was stunned by his lack of responsibility. This wasn't the first time he had made financial decisions without consulting me, but this felt like a slap in the face. The house we were living in was bought in my name, but George acted like it was his. He had even bragged to his friends about owning it, conveniently leaving out the part where I was the one paying for it. Over the years, Zerania, but I never expected it to escalate to this. He used to be a different man when we first got married. Ambitious, kind, full of dreams. I remembered the days when his eyes sparkled with hope. But over time, that sparkle faded, replaced by bitterness and resentment. He had been stuck in part-time jobs for years, unable to hold down steady employment, while I had been the one carrying the financial load. Sometimes, I wondered if he even realized how much I was contributing to this family. Just as I was about to drift off to sleep, another thought jolted me awake. The joint bank account. I decided to check it in the morning. When I logged in, my heart sank. $2,000 was missing. George had never mentioned any big expenses lately, so where had the money gone? My stomach tightened as I realized I'd have to confront him about this. I waited until he returned from wherever he had been, bracing myself for the conversation. "George," I began cautiously, "what happened to the $2,000 in our account?" He looked annoyed, as if the question was a burden. "I gave it to my parents," he replied casually. "What?" I asked, shocked. "For what reason?" His next words left me speechless. "I thought I'd surprise them with a hot spring trip. It's my mother's birthday." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. George had taken $2,000 from our joint account to fund a surprise trip for his parents without even discussing it with me. We had bills to pay, a mortgage to cover, and yet he thought it was perfectly fine to spend such a large amount of money on a whim. Anger bubbled up inside me, but I tried to remain calm. "You should have used your own money for that," I said, my voice trembling with frustration. "This is our household account. We're supposed to make decisions like this together." George shrugged, completely unfazed. "It's all part of being a good son," he said, as if that justified everything. I was stunned by his lack of responsibility. This wasn't the first time he had made financial decisions without consulting me, but this felt like a slap in the face. The house we were living in was bought in my name, but George acted like it was his. He had even bragged to his friends about owning it, conveniently leaving out the part where I was the one paying for it. Over the years, I had grown tired of his behavior, his refusal to help around the house, his constant quitting of jobs, and now this. I felt worn out, like I had been carrying the weight of our entire marriage on my shoulders. Something had to change, but I wasn't sure what. The next morning, I woke up feeling drained but determined. I couldn't keep living like this, constantly worrying about money, about George's unpredictable actions, about our future. I needed space to think, to figure out what I wanted from my life. As I packed my bags, preparing to leave for Anna's house, I felt a sense of relief wash over me. It wasn't just about leaving the house, it was about leaving behind the chaos that George had created. But something still nagged at me. I had always been the one to fix things, to hold everything together. What would happen to George if I left? Could he handle the mortgage? The household expenses? Deep down, I knew the answer. He couldn't. I picked up the phone and called Anna again. "Anna, I need to tell you something," I said. "George used $2,000 from our joint account for a trip for his parents. He didn't even ask me." Anna sighed on the other end of the line. "Mom, that's not right. You've been carrying too much of the burden for too long." "I know," I replied, feeling a lump form in my throat. "But I just don't know what to do anymore." "Come stay with us for a while," Anna said. "We'll figure things out together." When Anna picked me up the next day, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. Just being in her presence, with her warm smile and caring nature, made me feel like everything might be okay. She had always been my rock, even when she was younger. Now, as an adult, she was strong, independent, and wise beyond her years. As we drove back to her house, I opened up about everything that had been going on with George, his constant job hopping, his financial irresponsibility, his coldness towards me. Anna listened quietly, occasionally nodding or offering a word of support. "Mom, you don't have to live like this," she said gently. "You deserve better. Her words struck a chord with me. I had been putting up with George's behavior for so long that I had almost forgotten what it felt like to be treated with respect. I don't know what to do, I admitted. I've thought about divorce, but it's such a big step. Sometimes big steps are necessary, Anna replied. You've always been there for me, supporting me through everything. Now it's time for you to take care of yourself. As we arrived at her house, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't felt in years. Maybe it was time for a change. Maybe it was time to start thinking about my own happiness for once. A few days later, as I settled into life at Anna's, I received a call that made my blood run cold. It was from my mother-in-law, thanking me again for the hot spring trip. But then she mentioned something that left me speechless. We're so excited to be moving in with you soon, she said cheerfully. George told us all about it. My heart dropped. Moving in? George had never mentioned anything about his parents coming to live with us permanently. I couldn't believe he had gone behind my back once again, making life-altering decisions without consulting me. I felt a surge of anger and frustration. This was too much. I immediately called George, my hands shaking as I dialed his number. Why did you tell your parents they could move in with us? I demanded the moment he picked up. We never agreed on this. George's response was dismissive. They're getting old, Sarah. It's only right that we take care of them. You're overreacting. Overreacting? I echoed, incredulous. We can barely manage our own household, and now you want to add 2 more people into the mix? This isn't just your decision to make. You're being selfish, George snapped. If you don't like it, maybe you should just leave. His words hit me like a punch to the gut. George's latest betrayal made one thing clear. I couldn't stay in this marriage any longer. His complete disregard for my feelings, his lack of communication, and his selfishness had crossed a line. I couldn't believe I had let things go this far, but now it was time to make a change. I contacted a lawyer the very next day. I didn't know much about the legal process, but I knew I needed to protect myself. The house was in my name, and I had been paying the mortgage for years. I wasn't about to let George push me out of the home I had worked so hard to maintain. I gathered all the necessary paperwork and started the process of filing for divorce. It wasn't an easy decision, but deep down, I knew it was the right one. I couldn't live like this anymore, constantly walking on eggshells around George, never knowing what irrational decision he would make next. As the days passed, I felt a strange sense of relief, like a weight had been lifted from my shoulders. I had finally taken control of my own life, and it felt empowering. I wasn't going to let George's selfishness dictate my future any longer. The day I told George about the divorce was tense, to say the least. I had braced myself for his reaction, knowing he wouldn't take the news well. When I finally broke the news to him, his face twisted with anger. You can't be serious, he spat. You're really going to throw away everything we've built? I took a deep breath, keeping my voice calm. George, we haven't built anything. I've been the one holding everything together, while you've been making decisions behind my back and wasting our money. I can't live like this anymore. His eyes darkened, and he slammed his hand on the table. You think you can just walk away? Fine, but don't expect to take the house. It's mine, too. I met his gaze, unflinching. The house is in my name, George. I've been paying the mortgage, not you. If you want to fight over it, we can let the lawyers handle it. For a moment, he looked stunned, as if he hadn't realized how serious I was. But then he sneered. Fine. Go ahead. You'll regret this. I turned away, feeling both exhausted and liberated. I had stood my ground, and now there was no turning back. After the divorce was finalized, I moved in with Anna and her family permanently. Their home was filled with warmth and love, a stark contrast to the cold, tension-filled atmosphere I had endured with George. Anna's husband was kind and supportive, always checking in to see how I was doing. I quickly became a part of their household, helping out with chores and spending time with my granddaughter. For the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe. I had no more worries about George's impulsive decisions or his financial recklessness. Instead, I was surrounded by people who cared about me, who appreciated me for who I was. Anna's in-laws were especially welcoming, treating me like a member of their own family. I hadn't realized how much I had missed this sense of belonging. Life felt peaceful, and I was starting to rediscover parts of myself that I had buried long ago. I began to find joy in small things again. Cooking a meal with Anna, playing with my granddaughter, or simply sitting on the porch, enjoying the quiet. While I was finding peace, George's life was spiraling out of control. Without my financial support, he struggled to keep up with the mortgage. He called me one day, his voice frantic. "Sarah, I can't make the payments. The mortgage is $1,800 a month. How am I supposed to afford that?" I felt a pang of pity, but I reminded myself that this was the result of his own choices. "You knew about the mortgage, George," I said calmly. "I've been paying it for years. Now it's your responsibility." "But I can't do it," he shouted. "I don't have enough money," I sighed. "You'll have to figure something out." George had never been good with money, and now that he was on his own, the consequences of his financial recklessness were catching up with him. Eventually, he was forced to sell the house to cover his debts. He moved into a small, cramped apartment, far from the life he had once bragged about. I heard from mutual friends that he had fallen on hard times, unable to find steady work and struggling with growing debt. Part of me felt sad for him, but I knew that I had made the right choice. As the months passed, I began to settle into my new life. I no longer thought about George as often, except when I heard news of his continued struggles. Instead, I focused on my own happiness and the happiness of my family. Anna was expecting her second child, and I was looking forward to becoming a grandmother again. Her husband and his family had become like my own, and I felt truly blessed to be surrounded by so much love and support. One afternoon, while I was playing with my granddaughter, Anna came over to me with a warm smile. "Mom, I just want you to know how proud I am of you," she said. "You've been through so much, but you've come out stronger." Her words filled my heart with joy. "Thank you, Anna," I replied, my voice thick with emotion. "I couldn't have done it without you." As I looked around at the life I had built for myself, I realized that this was my second chance. I had left behind a life of uncertainty and unhappiness, and in its place, I had found peace, love, and hope. It was the beginning of a new chapter, and for the first time in a long time,